Okay, it is 7:02. We'll get tonight's presentation underway. Good evening. My name is Brian Howard. I am the Executive Director of the Spelman Museum of Stamps and Postal History in Weston, Massachusetts. Want to thank each and every one of you for coming in tonight on Zoom to be a part of this presentation on the Pink Triangle exhibit, which was created by Dr. Tomas Griebling and is currently on display at the Spelman and will be through the end of Pride Month. The museum is committed to bringing programming that represents diverse perspectives and provides enlightenment on the vast expanse of philately across societies, across time, across cultures. And we couldn't be more pleased to have been participating in Pride Month for the first time and to have tonight's presentation be a featured component of that. In addition to tonight's presentation and the aforementioned Pink Triangle exhibit, there is another frame that is on display at the museum that was created in concert with the Gay and Lesbian History on Stamps organization, many members of whom provided information for that display. We hope to grow our participation in Pride Month in future years, and again, are just very pleased to have had a great first time around. So I'm happy to introduce tonight's presenter. Dr. Tomas Griebling is a longtime philatelist and collector of postal and sports history and related ephemera. His exhibits focus on his collections of the Olympic Games, especially the history of the symbol of the Olympic rings, and LGBTQ+ history and civil rights. Dr. Griebling's Pink Triangle exhibit won the most popular single frame exhibit at the 2023 Greater Houston Stamp Show. It was also shown at the San Diego Stamp Show earlier this spring and will be on exhibit at the Great American Stamp Show in Hartford, Connecticut in August. So congratulations to Dr. Griebling for not only creating this exhibit, but for the accolades he's already received, and we wish him the very best at GAS in Hartford. For the presentation itself, I want to let everybody know that this is being recorded. If you would like to watch this on playback, please contact me at the Spelman Museum, and we will probably have this as a link that we can share with you upon request. Also, I'd ask that you keep yourselves muted, and we will have a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. Just use the little hand icon if you have a question. I will do my best to moderate the discussion, and we hope to have a good Q&A after Tomas's presentation. Dr. Tomas Griebling is a urologic surgeon on faculty at the University of Kansas School of Medicine. He and his husband, Michael Miklovic, live in the Kansas City metro. Tomas, thank you so much. The floor is yours.
Terrific. Well, Brian, thank you so much for the kind introduction. And I'm just delighted to have the opportunity to display this exhibit at the Spelman for May and June and to do this presentation. And I'd like to thank everybody for joining in the audience. Are you able to, oh, there we go. Let me share my screen so that we'll pull up the slides. Can everyone see the slides? Great. So again, I'm honored to give this presentation. I will disclose that I present only on my own behalf. I'm not presenting on the behalf of my employer or my work. We're required to give that sort of disclosure. But I am going to share a small story. I gave a presentation at a professional meeting last month, about 6 weeks ago, on improving the quality of care for LGBT people. There were about 200 people in the audience. And I asked for a show of hands of how many people in that group knew what the Pink Triangle meant. And I was kind of saddened that in about 200 people, only about 4 people raised their hand. So we want to try to keep the history alive, and I'm honored to be able to do this. A couple of acknowledgements to start. I want to thank the Spelman Museum of Stamps and Postal History and Brian Howard and all of the trustees and board members of the museum. Michael, my husband, and I had the opportunity to visit the museum a couple of weeks ago, and we were just so impressed with the museum and the way that it has really engaged with the community of Weston and the regional area. And it's an amazing resource. If people haven't been, I would encourage you to go and visit. I also want to thank the Gay and Lesbian History on Stamps group. I'm a member of this Philatelic organization, and Lisa Foster, our president, I think is online. We do great work, and she's really done an amazing job in reinvigorating the organization. And I want to thank some other members who have shared material with me, and some actually pretty rare material to include in the exhibit. And then finally, I want to thank the Houston Philatelic Society, particularly Ron and Beth Strasser, and Jay and Denise Stotts, who are leaders in their organization. The impetus for this particular exhibit came out of their annual stamp show. I'd wanted to do something on sort of LGBT-related civil rights. They have a competition every year. It's a single frame competition based on a color. For more than 20 years, they have skipped pink because they didn't think people would be able to create exhibits. And the moment they pulled pink for the competition this last year, I knew what I wanted to do. So I'm very honored and pleased to thank them for the impetus for this presentation. So we'll just kind of start at the beginning. Homosexuality has been recognized in human history since the beginning of recorded human life. And we go back to the ancient Greeks and Romans and see sexuality depicted in art. And that includes both straight sex between couples of opposite sex, and also same-sex type of relationship and interaction. In the 1910s and 1920s, as photography was developing, we started to see postcards, and these are both postcards that I have that show couples of the day in fairly intimate embraces. Now, we don't always know exactly what the relationship is between these people, but these types of interactions appear to be more than just friends, and probably more than just relatives. And so there's a rich history of these types of postcards and other material from that time. We move on to the 1930s, and this is really kind of where the exhibit starts in Germany with the fall of the Weimar Republic and the development of the movement of social nationalism, which ultimately led to the rise of the Nazi Party and the changes that occurred at that time. This is a vintage postcard that's in my exhibit. It's actually one of my favorites. It shows a night scene in Berlin around 1930, 1931. So it's just toward the end of the Weimar Republic and before the rise of the Nazis. And you can see that cabaret culture was really big at the time. And it was something where gay and lesbian culture was actually not only accepted, but celebrated. And there are times and cultures over history where that has been true. Of course, there are others where it has been demonized and vilified. And we're dealing with some of that now. And we'll talk about current culture toward the end of the presentation. I think when we think of this time in history, we often think of the musical and movie by Kander and Ebb, Cabaret. And here in the United States, I think we think of this sort of image of a very glamorous Liza Minnelli and Joel Grey and the others that won the Oscars for this film at the time. But this is not the view that we have all over the world. And certainly we see the rise of Nazism in this play and in this movie. And in other parts of the world, the view is very different. This was the movie poster that was created for the release of the film in Poland. And Victor Gorka, a Polish graphic artist, created this. So you can see the face of Joel Grey, the narrator, in the center, but the dancers representing the rise of Nazism and the beginning of World War II. Power shifts started happening in Germany in the early 1930s, 1933. One of the prominent things was the Reichstag fire. Many people believe it was started by arson in late February. The Reichstag is where the German parliament met, and there was a massive fire. They rebuilt the building and it reopened just about a month later. And Adolf Hitler had been elected Chancellor of Germany about 4 months before this. And he addressed the Reichstag on the 23rd of March, so 2 days after the building reopened. And that's really when he is felt to have risen into his dictatorship. We see postcards and other propaganda material from the time. This is a vintage postcard in my exhibit showing Nazi leaders and trying to develop and show their military strength even at that time. This I thought was an interesting piece of art. So Joseph Thorak was a German sculptor. He was actually a favorite of Hitler. And the postcard that you see on the left was released for the Paris exhibition in 1937. And this was one of 2 sculptures that flanked the German pavilion at the time. It's called Comrades or Comradeship. And you can see that it is supposed to represent sort of strong military presence, strong, healthy people. But note that it has a fairly strong homoerotic overtone to it, as did much of Thorak's work. I don't know much more about the artist. I don't know details about his own sexuality or his own identity beyond that, but certainly this work does kind of exemplify that. Again, more propaganda type postcards, Hitler rising to power. You see the postmark here with the swastika, which became prominent during the Third Reich during their postal history. Dr. Magnus Hirschfeld was a German physician who was a leading researcher in sexual health and sexual medicine. He developed an institute in Berlin, and they had a large research following. And the photographs that you see, these aren't philatelic materials, but the 2 photographs on the left show young Nazi officers raiding their research institute and destroying valuable research materials, and you can see book burnings happening. Dr. Hirschfeld realized what was happening. He was also of Jewish descent, and he fled from Germany and self-exiled in France and died of natural causes in 1935. And Germany released a postage stamp that you can see for the 150th anniversary of his birth. It shows the classic sort of male and female symbols, but with rainbow colors on them. He was a big proponent that homosexuality in both men and women was natural, and that sexuality existed on a spectrum, which made his work pioneering at the time. Another key time around this era was the Night of the Long Knives. And this was a time, it occurred over about 4 days and was a purge of Nazi leaders that Hitler felt were becoming basically too strong and opposing his power and opposing his will. One of those was Ernst Röhm. And Röhm was a leader of the SA, which was the paramilitary group related basically to the SS. And so they were a sort of large but rogue bunch of people who carried out non-legal activities and committed quite a lot of crime during their time. But Röhm was felt to be getting too powerful, and Hitler saw him subsequently as a threat. Röhm had actually been one of his close friends, and Röhm himself was openly gay. Hitler did not seem to be bothered or mind that initially, but he ordered him murdered at the beginning of the purge. And during those nights, they offered him the opportunity to commit suicide. He adamantly refused and was murdered. A couple of other major leaders were also murdered during this time. And what's interesting is several of them were actually found in bed at the hotel where they had been asked to meet, thinking there was going to be sort of a rally for Hitler. And a couple of them were found in bed with young men from the SS and the SA. And so this was, again, the beginning of the purge, not only of these people, but maybe of homosexuality by Hitler and the Nazis. I think many people are much more familiar, of course, with the symbol of the yellow Star of David, which were patch triangles that were on the uniforms that people in the concentration camps were forced to wear, but also people in everyday life in the cities during that time. And perhaps just because there were so many more people, it's estimated more than 6 million people died in the Holocaust. But the pink triangle was similarly worn on the uniforms and in a couple of different varieties. Here you can see a small one with the letter P standing for Poland with the number. And on the other, you see, again, a fabric patch. These were prominent. It's felt that the color pink was chosen to represent gay men because it was perhaps an effeminate view, and it was maybe the most demasculinizing color. But note that the triangles point down in these cases, and that becomes important later when we talk about reactive activism and how people have used the symbol subsequently. So there was a fairly elaborate system of markings that the Nazis created. The yellow stars were for Jews, the pink triangles, gay men. Black triangles represented lesbians and antisocials. Brown for and gypsies, the purple triangles for Jehovah's Witnesses, green triangles for people considered habitual criminals, and red triangles for prisoners of war or other political prisoners. And the letters represented nationalities over them. This is a fairly famous photograph from the public domain that shows a group of gay men at Sachsenhausen, which was one of the concentration camps in 1938. They are arrested and in the camps under paragraph 175 of Nazi law, which criminalized male homosexuality at the time. Interestingly, law did not criminalize lesbianism. And although many were persecuted, certainly they were not as rigidly enforced. And so there were probably fewer deaths that we know of. It's estimated more than 150,000 men were arrested and convicted, and more than 70,000 men died during the Holocaust who were marked with the pink triangle. A couple of pieces of history. This is a stationary cover. It's from Sachsenhausen concentration camp. You can see here where that is from. It has the name of the prisoner, their prison number, and then information in German about the rules of the concentration camp. It shows the stamp from the Third Reich and the cancel from when it was sent. Oranienburg is the town where Sachsenhausen is located. And then you see the censor's mark here, which shows that it has been opened and read and then was acceptable for mailing and shows the swastika. This is a postcard in the exhibit. The men who were marked with the triangle were often put into forced labor and often the harshest conditions. Many of them simply were worked to death. This is a piece of art that was done by the son of a concentration camp victim at Sachsenhausen, his father, and they were originally from Norway. But you can see people being chained to this, a trailer and forced to carry that around. They were often forced to dig rock or clay and the clay pits. And this is another example. This is actually a picture postcard from the time that could be purchased and mailed. This is an interesting piece in my collection. Not everyone were in the concentration camps themselves. And this is a card. It's cut off here. It extends over farther to give more information. But basically, this is a forced labor employment card. It gives the information on the date. So here you see, that we're into the winter of 1932. It gives the person's name who's being forced into work, who was born in 1913. And then you see these stamps that they would be given, and the stamps represented their work days. This particular one was from a fertilizer plant, and so people were being forced to get into work to make munitions and other things for the Nazis and the Axis powers. Well, 1945, obviously an important point as we reach the end of the war and liberation of the concentration camps. But the key to remember is that it was liberation for some, but not for all. and reparations have been slow or absent. And that's particularly true for the gay men that were marked with the pink triangle. The law remained. So even though the Allied forces demanded that Nazi law be repealed, they did not enforce repeal of paragraph 175. So even the Allies considered homosexuality a crime, both the United States and the Soviet Union and other allies. So many of those people went back into prisons or went into psychiatric care. This is a postcard honoring the liberation of Auschwitz. You can see the stamps and a vignette here that show the electrified fence and barbed wire. And then the fancy cancel here shows the pink triangle with the P for Poland over it, again, honoring those victims on this postcard. This is an art postcard from 1947. It shows the liberation of prisoners at Dachau, which was the other camp that held the largest numbers of gay men, Sachsenhausen and Dachau. Here you can see again the uniform with the triangle on it and the number representing the inmates' crime and their category things. This is a commemorative cover from Poland, again, recognizing the liberation of the camps. You have 3 stamps that represent that, and then the cachet, which with the blue and white stripes represent what the prison uniforms would have looked like, either a red or pink triangle representing a Polish prisoner, and then the electrified barbed wire. This is a commemorative cover that honors the liberation of Sachsenhausen. Again, one of the largest camps and one of the largest where a large number of gay men were murdered. Sachsenhausen has built a tower in memorial at that site. And notice that at the top, there are a whole series of different triangles. So it doesn't represent just the men with the pink triangle, but all of the prisoners that were held and persecuted at this site. And then this is a badge that I have in the exhibit that again honors the memory of those who were held there. France issued a stamp specifically for the liberation of the camps. Here you can see the Allied forces with a soldier from the United States and the other European allies on the left, from the Soviet Union on the right, and a prisoner in the camp in uniform being liberated and being saved. This is an example, and it's in the exhibit of a proof. This is one of the proof sets that's done, and it's signed by the artist. So these are relatively rare. And then this is a cover that shows the same stamp with the dove representing peace, holding the olive branch, flying through the barbed wire with the liberation of the camps. And then a photograph from that time showing Allied soldiers helping to liberate prisoners at one of the camps. There have been a lot of remembrance and a lot of honors given for the Holocaust in general. The United Nations has created an International Day of Commemoration in memory of the victims of the Holocaust, and you can see the art which shows the move from the oppression, the barbed wire, into love and hope with the flowers. And this is a postage cover that shows the stamp being released in different countries. So for the United States, for Israel, and for Germany. And it basically represents all of that for the United Nations. What's really interesting is there have been no similar memorials or stamps. In fact, no country to date has specifically released a stamp that honors the gay men that were marked with the pink triangle. And then this is the last part of the first part of the presentation. This is a hospital in Germany, which was used as a psychiatric hospital after the war. And so many of the men who were released from the camps may have gone into this type of facility since most of them were not free. We move on to the early parts of the gay rights movement, and I'm going to focus mostly in the United States, although similar things were happening in Europe and other places. So early activism really started in the 1950s, so not too far after the war. And the Mattachine Society and the Gay Liberation Front are probably the two most well-known. And then, of course, the Stonewall riots. So the Stonewall Inn was a small gay bar and nightclub in Greenwich Village. And it's been described as sort of dingy and kind of run down. But at that time, the police would routinely raid these facilities, and they would raid bars and try to arrest people on different kinds of laws where people couldn't dance together if they were of the same gender. If they were cross-dressing, they had to be wearing 3 items of clothing of their assigned personal gender, or they could be arrested and jailed. And on June 28th, 1969, the patrons of this particular bar basically said, "We've had enough." And they stood up against the police and they started a riot where they started throwing things and basically fighting back against the police. The historical accounts of this report that most of the people were drag queens, people of color and minorities, a lot of immigrants and people who were undocumented. So again, even within our community, people who were sort of on the fringe. And this went on over about 4 nights. And you can see here, the one on the left is actually a picture postcard that's in my exhibit. The others are photographs just to show a little bit more about what was happening in the demonstrations at the time and the involvement in fights against the police. The Stonewall Inn has since been named a National Historic landmark and is protected by the National Park Service. It is open. It's a functioning bar in Greenwich Village in New York. The other thing that I would point out, and I think part of what's really important, is that the legal status of LGBTQ people is still really in jeopardy in many places. 64 countries who are members of the United Nations, it's still illegal. In 11 of those, they can impose the death penalty, and most commonly that's done by stoning. Many other countries can impose life imprisonment just for being gay, and many other countries still lack true equality. The 1970s started to see the beginning of scholarship on this particular topic, and the first was a memoir that was written by a concentration camp survivor and a friend who helped him write. And then we see other writing at the time. So this gives a personal first-person voice to what was happening to these men in the concentration camps. Gore Vidal wrote some interesting essays looking at sort of the gay experience and the Jewish experience during the time. And then a landmark play, which also became a film. The play opened on Broadway in 1980. Actually, Richard Gere was nominated for a Tony, and the play was nominated for Best Play, called Bent. And it follows what happens to the lives of 2 men who are in the concentration camps. In one of them, his lover and partner is actually murdered in front of him before they're put into the camp. But you can see here the cover from the script, which shows the barbed wire and in the shape of the triangle. The HIV and AIDS epidemic started in the 1980s. The first reported cases were on June 5th, 1981. There were 5 cases reported by the Centers for Disease Control. And then, of course, we saw an exponential rise in cases over time, and gay men were disproportionately affected. The problem with this is that the government and politicians politicized this as a gay disease rather than as a virus. And by 2018, more than 700,000 people have died in the United States. The United States Postal Service issued the red ribbon stamp that you see here on the 1st of December, which is International World AIDS Day in 1993 to raise awareness. The use of the pink triangle basically came in activism through a group called ACT UP, and it's the AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power. They were a group of 6 men in New York City who basically said nothing is happening and we're not getting enough funding or political action. And so they used the pink triangle. Notice that they flipped the symbol upside down. So on most of their materials, it's pointed up for hope, and they created the term silence equals death, and sometimes action equals life in order to raise awareness and to try to help with funding. There were protests all over the country. They would hold things that were called die-ins, where people would lay on the ground to represent the number of people who had died. This is perhaps one of the more valuable pieces in my exhibit. It's pretty rare. It is a postally used cover from ACT Up in Los Angeles with their logo. It was sent for a protest to try to get people to come to protest the state assembly in California on July 31st. And you can see it has a sticker that says action equals life. I have another one that says silence equals death. The reason it's rare is because these would have been mailed out, people would have opened it and probably just thrown the envelope away. So trying to find them has been quite challenging. Other examples of the ongoing protest. I was in college at this time, and I vividly remember ACT UP and the work that they did to try to raise awareness. Here they're talking about how the rates of death for women were higher than in men. But you see a wide swath of the population were interested in trying to raise awareness and raise money. This is an interesting postcard that I have in my collection that's in the exhibit. It shows a happy, presumably straight couple in the background. But what you see here is the type of sort of guerrilla protest that ACT UP was known for. So you see pictures of Ronald Reagan with various slurs about him. And this was really because Reagan, who was president for much of this time, was felt not to really address this. And in fact, he didn't say the word AIDS until very late in his presidency. And then only about 2 weeks before his friend Rock Hudson, who was a fellow actor, died of the disease at the time. A few artists and others have been very important in the movement. Keith Haring was a young artist who focused on graffiti type art. You can see his work here. This is was originally a large poster that shows again the pink triangle facing up for hope and his generalized type of work. He died of AIDS in 1990. This is a postcard that he created specifically for ACT UP. It can show their silence equals death logo, the pink triangle. He added ignorance equals fear to try to raise educational awareness. And you can see that it's see no evil, hear no evil, and speak no evil. The modern gay rights movement has continued. And as we know, June is celebrated as Pride Month. That's because of the fact that the Stonewall riots occurred in June. And so you see both celebration and protest in Pride movements, looking for improvement in civil rights, marriage equality and family law, improved health outcomes, and other areas. But we also have the current culture wars, and I'm going to talk about that very briefly in a minute. The National March on Washington was in 1987. It was a huge protest to try to get people. They were shooting for more than 1 million people to come out. Here you can see photographs from the time to march on the mall, and you can see the triangles again prominently featured as a method of highlighting this protest. San Francisco for many years has laid out a large fabric or light display representing the pink triangle on the hill. For those of you who visited San Francisco, if you're driving in from the airport to downtown, you see this hill, and it really is impressive to see the pink triangle that they put out for Pride in June. There have been some cancels and other philatelic material related to this. The Gay and Lesbian History Society created a special cancel for Pride Fest in 1993 in Hartford. And then you can see that others have incorporated the triangle in different ways, for example, in this person from Syracuse. This is an interesting set that I'm still looking for if anyone has any information about it. In 2004, a group of protesters in Australia sailed a boat to an island just off the northeast coast and claimed that it was a new independent country called the Gay Kingdom of the Coral Sea. They created a postal authority, which was essentially a postal box, just a red post box like you'd have out on the road. And that was what they declared as their postal entity of an independent nation. They created these stamps. Notice they're denominated in euros, so they're not valid for Australian Post. But it includes a number of different symbols, including the pink triangle here. And they did it to try to highlight and protest for marriage equality in Australian Parliament, which was finally approved in 2017. And then there have been other countries that have followed suit and have followed with other signs and symbols. We're very familiar with the rainbow flag, which was created by Gilbert Baker, who was a native Kansan. And that is highlighted here on this cover, and stamps from Spain after the approval of marriage equality. They were actually one of the first countries to approve it in Europe. This is a limited edition postcard and stamp from Canada, again, honoring the approval of marriage equality in Canadian Parliament. There have been a few stamps representing gay pride. This was from Austria. This is from 2010, and it represents honoring the 15th year of the Pride Parade in Vienna. Notice there's a very tiny little pink triangle here at the bottom. So again, very few stamps specifically honor the triangle. Luxembourg released this in 2015. This shows a number of different stamps, or I'm sorry, a number of different symbols on the stamp, including the pink triangle of people persecuted during the Holocaust. The Netherlands released this set of stamps, two different designs. Notice that the triangle is featured in it, and pink is a prominent color for Euro Pride in 2016. And I have a cachet cover in my exhibit that shows that as well, along with the rainbow. Germany has released one stamp that I'm aware of that celebrates diversity. So it's not specifically for gay pride, but notice among all of these different symbols, there is a tiny little pink triangle in their stamp from 2022. In the United States, Harvey Milk was a prominent American politician and activist. He was elected to the Board of Supervisors for the city of San Francisco, and in 1978 was assassinated along with George Moscone, who was mayor of the city of San Francisco, by another supervisor, so another member of their board. And you can see here he is out campaigning and wearing the pink triangle prominently. But this is the stamp that was issued a few years ago to honor him. It doesn't have the triangle on it, but it does have the rainbow flag. And this and the red ribbon are the two stamps the United States has issued that are related to this topic. The Los Angeles Police Department created a recruiting campaign to try to increase diversity among their force. This was back in the mid-90s, and again, prominently shows the pink triangle. And then Alan Turing is a major name in the movement and in winning the war, in the Allies' victory. He was a British mathematician and computer scientist, was considered a brilliant mathematician, and he actually helped break the code of the Axis powers and helped hasten the Allied win in World War II. The sad part is he was gay and was persecuted by the British government. And so homosexuality was still considered illegal. He was basically forced to take hormone therapy to try to reduce his sexuality. And it's considered basically a form of chemical castration. The Queen pardoned him posthumously, and the Bank of England subsequently has issued a 50-pound note. It's the largest note in general circulation, that shows Turing on one side, the Queen on the reverse. And actually just about a month ago, they have reissued this with images of both Queen Elizabeth and now King Charles on the back. It's on polymer, and notice that it is pink polymer, so appropriately chosen for this person, this topic. The Homo Monument is a monument in Amsterdam that was created in 1987. It sits, and there are 3 areas of pink marble triangles that face each other on a water feature. But it was the first of now several public monuments to the people that were persecuted during the war. This is another example of all of the symbols that were used, and notice that the triangle is featured. We're moving into very modern times, and we're almost finished with the presentation. This is a postcard that I really like. It is from Ukraine. It shows Vladimir Putin on the left with the clown nose and the makeup. And this is because he has really developed significant anti-LGBT and very homophobic laws that have been passed in Russia at his command. And of course, here we see Zelensky, who's the president of Ukraine, dressed as Captain America. And so it represents not only the war of the countries, but the cultural wars that are ongoing. This particular design is also relatively new, and it's created by an artist and self-published and self-funded. It is designed to raise money and awareness for the men being tortured in Chechnya. That's happening as an ongoing problem. People are dying in Chechnya, and so he's reinvented the triangle for that purpose. This is a window decal that I have. This is actually just from last year. Again, sort of like Stonewall, it shows the stone wall in the back in white. The flag, if you don't recognize it, is the state flag of Florida. And then you can see the fist raised for gay rights. Florida has become a touch point for the culture wars, having passed a lot of homophobic and anti-LGBT, anti-diversity legislation. And so there are places that now have travel bans and things to the state of Florida. I'm going to end with just a couple of artists who really have a lot of notoriety in the movement, although not specifically to the Pink Triangle itself. Robert Mapplethorpe was an American photographer who was known for black and white photography, mostly still lifes and florals. But he also did portraits of gay and lesbian people. It included some erotic material looking at leather culture and other things. It became a touch point for controversy and debate for funding for the National Endowment for the Arts in Congress during his lifetime. Tuukka Laaksonen, also known as Tama Finland, was a Finnish artist who drew, and all of the work that he does is hand-drawn. He died in 1991, so he lived through World War II. And he did not shy away from the erotic and the sexual. And you can see a series of 3 stamps that were released here as a souvenir sheet from Finland. It was very controversial at the time. A lot of his work shows male sort of hypersexuality and the leather and sort of BDSM and kink community. And what was interesting is there were a lot of places that refused to sell these stamps, but this series of stamps is the highest grossing set of stamps ever released by Finnish Post. So interesting culture there. And I have a cachet cover in the exhibit that shows this. The final artist is Andrew Donnelly. Andrew Donnelly is a British artist and activist from Liverpool. This is a card that he's created recently, again, looking at the culture wars and trying to promote LGBTQ pride. Note that it shows both the rainbow flag and the pink triangle. Donnelly was the artist responsible for much of the National Health Service art and work that went into their HIV campaigns for Liverpool, but also nationally. And he is still active and working in Great Britain. And finally, I'll close just with our thoughts, and this is something that you hear very frequently related to Holocaust history, is never forget. Always remember, we need to keep this history alive. Like I say, I was in a group of 200 health professionals and only 4 people who knew what the pink triangle was. So here we see the pink triangle with sort of the barbed wire and things falling, apart in the Holocaust, but a symbol of pride, a symbol of the future, and to never forget our history. So again, I'm honored to have this opportunity to present, and we have some time for discussion and questions. So thank you all very much.
Scott Kitchen.
Sorry about that. That was just to say thank you. I thought that was an applause, not raising the hand.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thomas, I have a question. About
Sure.
how long did it take you to develop this initial exhibit? And it started as a 1-frame piece, but it is now 2.
It did start as a 1-frame. I had some of the material, but I had to collect a lot of the other material, and it took a full year to create the 1-frame exhibit. So the Houston stamp group has a fairly elaborate ceremony where they put a box of crayons, 24 crayons into a box, and they pull one out, and that's the color for next year. And they kind of skip over it, so they rotate and don't repeat. The year before had been yellow, and I did a couple of exhibits, one on sunflower postcards with vintage Valentines and things, and then the other one was on the Tour de France in yellow jersey. But when they pulled the pink one, I knew that that's what I wanted to do. So, but it took a year just to create that, and then I've been working on it since.
Thank you. Blue, you are next.
Hi,
Hi.
just wanted to say thank you. That was a fascinating presentation. I was actually going to go see it tomorrow, but you guys are closed on Wednesdays.
Well,
So
if you wanted to stop by, you're more than welcome. Just ring the doorbell. We'll let you in.
It's actually my birthday and we made other plans. So sorry.
Cool.
But I did have
Happy
a question.
birthday.
How much? Oh, thanks. How much of the material would you say came from essentially like word of mouth, like private donors, versus like how much did you have to acquire on like auctions, etc.?
Yep. So it's a mix. I would say the majority of things I have found either at stamp shows or more commonly online. When I go to stamp shows or postcard shows and things, this is not a topic that is generally sort of out there. If you say, I'm looking for this material, it's really hard to find because it's often not cataloged like that. But I have found things in auction. I have found material on eBay. And then a couple of other sites like Hip Stamp and Hip Postcard and things that sell from stamp and postal dealers. It's interesting because I've expanded the group that I look at. So now I'm looking at militaria, collectors and historians, because they're the people that have a lot of, for example, the World War II and concentration camp material and things. So, and then, like I said, I got a few pieces that were gifted to me by other collectors, which was really great, and I really appreciate that.
Well, if I find the coral sea sheet, which is like my personal white whale, and I was really hoping it was going to be in this exhibit. If I find it at the Great American Stamp Show, I'll let you have it. I'll come back. Thank you so much.
I'm gonna cross my fingers but not hold my breath. I've contacted probably about 50 dealers in the US, and I've contacted probably about 15 or 20 in Australia and New Zealand. Only one of them had ever heard of it, and none of them have it. So, but yeah, I'd love to find one. I've even seen it postally used, or on something, but.
Okay, next up we have Smith.
Yes. This was such a fantastic presentation. And we think of ourselves as educated. We constantly follow the Nazi movement and what has happened throughout that war and the discrimination against gays and lesbians and all the other people they imprisoned. But being a stamp dealer, I absolutely did not know what the pink triangle was, like some of the 200 people that you talked to, Michael. And so this should help a great deal, educating us and getting people to find that material and hopefully get it in your hands. And we can't wait till the Great American Stamp Show to be able to see your exhibit.
I appreciate it, and it's great to see you. Thank you for joining friends from here in Kansas City and past ATA president and honored philatelist. So thank you so much for joining. It is interesting, and now I have people looking out for material. I have a area collectors fair this weekend out in California, and he called me and said, I'm going to this, what do you want me to look for? And so we talked specifically about what he might find. A couple of other points just really quickly. So I mentioned that lesbians were not necessarily considered illegal in Nazi Germany, but they were certainly persecuted, not to the extent of gay men, but there are records. Ravensburger is the concentration camp that was mostly for women, and there are women that were murdered there that were lesbian. The other thing that I looked for, because I knew nothing about it, was what happened with the other Axis powers. So homosexuality was actually not considered illegal in fascist Italy. And although they did arrest people and sort of tried to isolate them out on an island, and then that kind of changed, that didn't last very long. And then in Imperial Japan, again, homosexuality was considered taboo, although they weren't necessarily persecuted, but there are reports of people being put into, for example, sexual slavery and being forced to basically act as prostitute or service soldiers at the time. So that's what was happening there. But I find no philatelic material really related to either Italy or Japan that relate to this topic. So I'm still on the lookout for that.
Okay, we have time for another question or two before 8 p.m. Does anyone else have anything to share? Any questions to ask? I see Joe P. over here. If you will unmute.
Yeah, a couple of things on the coral, the Gay Kingdom of the Coral Islands. They disbanded shortly after Australia approved gay marriage.
Correct. That was in 2017.
And let me double check. I had those stamps. And I actually, I had 2 sheets. Sorry, I'm kind of looking. And I know I traded one, and I actually have one left, which I would gladly send to you. And also, it's going to be hard to see. There was another, he called it the pink triangle post. It's hard to see, but I could also send you this, because honestly, these are just sitting in a stock book that get looked at maybe once a year, if that.
That is absolutely incredible. I would be honored to do that and be able to include them. I am hoping to expand the exhibit. Right now it's 2 frames. My goal is ultimately to get it to 5 frames, because at 5 frames, with the correct award level in competition, then you become eligible for international exhibition. And that ultimately would be a goal. So I'm very honored. I'm excited. We'll connect offline. But thank you so much. That's really incredible. And if I have other things in my collection you might want for trade, I'd be happy to discuss that.
I'm more than happy to send those your way.
Oh, well. Thank you.
That's wonderful. Thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions or commentary before we close up for the evening? Okay.
I kind of have a question. This is Smith's here. Spellman is looking at the history of LGBT and stuff like that. Can you give us a little bit of what's happening there, information that they're trying to get together about LGBT?
At the museum?
Yes.
Yeah, this is the first year that the Spellman Museum has initiated any activities relating to Pride Month. And our main focus this year has just been to start building a foundation of relationships with the gay and lesbian stamp community, and to make sure that the museum is seen as a welcoming and inclusive facility for all things related to philately. And it felt to me that this community was a huge untapped resource, and to see the response that we've had over the last several months of outreach to bring in Tomas's 2-frame exhibit, to have the relationship established with the GLHS, to get a frame in from them, and to do this presentation tonight was what we were looking to do. As far as active collecting, we certainly welcome any opportunity to review collections that relate to the LGBTQ community. happy to talk more about that. But really, the focus for 2024 was just to establish a baseline and to grow from there in future years.
If I may share, Brian, if it's okay. So as many of you may know, there are only two national level museums in the United States that look at stamps and postal history. Certainly the Spelman, and the other is the National Postal Museum, which is part of the Smithsonian. And I would share that we had and I was honored to be invited to a work group at WestPEX a couple of months ago with their curator team to talk about that. So there is an interest also at the other museum to look at that. And there were several of us that are on the call that were at that meeting. So.
Okay. Lou?
Sorry, Thomas, sorry, is it Thomas or Tomas?
Tomas.
Thomas, is there a way that we can get in touch with you afterwards
Sure.
via email or something that you'd like to give out? Obviously, I
Sure,
don't
sure,
wanna
absolutely.
it's
So my
too
personal email is tlginkc@yahoo.com.
Thank
Or
you
you
so
can
much.
sure, or you can contact the Spelman and they can help get information to me as well. I'm sure Brian would be.
And also, yes, for contacting the Spelman, my email is bhoward@spelmanmuseum.org, BHOWARD. And we're happy to continue this conversation and again, build more on this in 2025. Any final comments before we close up for the evening? Okay.
I just want to thank everybody for attending, and Brian, thank you and your team at the Spelman so much for this honor. I really appreciate it.
Thomas, the pleasure is all ours. Thank you very much for making the time tonight. And thanks again to everybody who made the time to come in and hear this fascinating presentation. We look forward to future collaborations. Y'all have a great night.
Thank you.